After the divorce, my ex sued me for my house. She said he didn't get anything on his own. But I got the papers. I'm Tom, 55 now. I guess you could say I'm in the second half of my life, but sometimes it feels more like the fourth quarter. The years go by quicker than you think, don't they? I used to run a small landscaping business. Still do, sort of. It's not as busy as it was, not after the accident. That's a whole other story, though. I keep it running, mostly for the sake of routine. You know, the satisfaction of seeing a job done right, even if it's just mowing lawns or trimming hedges. But back then, it was everything. I worked long hours, saved what I could, and little by little, I built something I could be proud of. That was always my way. I didn't ask for much, just some peace and a place to call my own. And that's what I had. This house. We built it together, Rachel and I. Well, we is a loose term. She didn't lift a finger to help, not really. She'd pick out the paint colors, nag about the tile, but when it came to the heavy lifting, that was on me. I bought the place when I was 35, just a little after my business had started picking up. It wasn't much. A 2-bedroom, 1.5-bath house in a quiet suburb. Nothing special, but it was mine. I worked my ass off for it, saved every penny, and poured my blood and sweat into making it a home. We moved in together after we got married. I thought it was the start of something, you know? A family. But looking back, it was more like the beginning of the end. The house became a symbol of that. I made all the decisions, laid all the plans, and Rachel? Well, she was always distant. After a few years, I started noticing she wasn't around much. Late nights at the office, weekends spent with friends I'd never met. She was never really there. Not like I needed her to be. But still, the house remained. And after the divorce, it was the one thing that was left for me. It wasn't a messy divorce. No nasty fights or arguments. No long, drawn-out drama. By the time it came to that, we both knew it was over. Rachel wasn't around when the papers were filed, really. She was already checking out mentally long before that. As far as I was concerned, the house was mine. She didn't want it, didn't want the upkeep, all the responsibility, so I stayed. I stayed here and started picking up the pieces. After a while, it didn't feel like just a house. It became a part of me, a reflection of everything I had built, my work, my past, my peace. The first year after the divorce was the hardest. I spent my days working and my nights alone, wandering through the rooms we once shared. I spent a lot of time in the backyard, working the garden, just me in the dirt. It was quiet, too quiet, but the silence was somehow comforting too. I was learning to live with myself again. That was 5 years ago. Since then, things had been fine. I hadn't seen Rachel in months, and I hadn't heard from her either. She didn't care about the house. She didn't want anything to do with me. That was the deal. She went her way, and I went mine. Simple. But then one morning, out of nowhere, she showed up on my doorstep. I didn't recognize her at first. She looked different. Older, I guess. But I knew that face, those eyes. There was no mistaking it. "Tom," she said, her voice colder than I remembered. "We need to talk." And that was how it started. It's strange how quickly your world can shift from quiet to chaos. One moment, you're in the middle of your routine, working, getting things done, trying to carve out some peace, and the next, everything changes. That was the day Rachel showed up on my doorstep. I had no idea what she wanted at first. It's not like we'd stayed in touch. I'd never heard from her, not even a birthday card or an occasional text. Hell, I didn't even know where she was living. So when I opened the door and saw her standing there, I thought maybe she just wanted to check in, or maybe there was some unfinished business. But I had no idea she was about to drop a bombshell. "Tom, I need to talk to you about the house," she said, as if this was something we could discuss over coffee. I stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of her. She was dressed in that same expensive way I'd always hated, too polished, too perfect. She looked like someone who had been living a good life, without a care. Not like someone who had been struggling. But then again, I didn't know what she'd been up to these last 5 years. "The house?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Rachel, I don't know what you think." "I want it," she cut me off, her tone colder than the winter wind, or at the very least, half the value of it. It took a moment for the words to sink in. I thought I'd heard her wrong. What? She didn't hesitate, her eyes cold, calculating. I want half the house, Tom. I'm filing for half of its value. My heart sank, not because I couldn't afford to lose the house, but because it felt like an invasion, an attack on something that was mine, something I'd worked for. I'm not asking, she continued. I'm suing you. I have the right to claim half of it. We were married after all. You think just because you've been living here for the last 5 years, it's all yours? That's not how it works. I stood there staring at her for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of it. The shock was settling in now, but there was something else too. Anger. Deep, quiet anger. But I kept my voice calm. I had to. Rachel, the house was mine before we even got married, I said slowly, trying to stay composed. I built it, every inch of it. I put my blood, sweat, and savings into it. You didn't lift a finger. Doesn't matter, she shot back. You wouldn't have had the money for it without me. I helped you when you were starting out. I supported you. I paid for a lot of things you don't even realize. I felt my hands curl into fists, but I didn't show it. That's a stretch, don't you think? You were never the one working. You never helped with the actual work, the planning, the construction. This was mine, Rachel. My sweat, my money. I didn't ask you to support me. You weren't exactly around to do that. But she didn't flinch. She was resolute, cold even. You think this is personal? It's business. You don't get to have it all just because you decided to stay in the house after the divorce. I want my share. It's fair. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was she really doing this? After everything? After walking out, after leaving me to pick up the pieces, she was going to come back and demand something that wasn't hers. But I didn't show it. I couldn't. I just nodded and said, fine. If that's what you want, I guess I'll see you in court. And with that, she left. No more words, no apology, just a cold stare and the sense that I was about to be dragged into something I never saw coming. It wasn't until the papers arrived that the weight of what was happening really hit me. The lawsuit was official, detailed, formal, and frankly, humiliating. She was demanding not just half the value of the house, but full ownership. The day we first went to court was the worst of it. I sat there in that sterile room, listening to Rachel's lawyer drone on about how I didn't deserve to keep the house. They pulled out every card they could find, including statements that I hadn't achieved anything on my own. They claimed I was incapable of managing my own finances, that I hadn't built the business or the house by myself. And Rachel? She was the one who had been there for me, who had supported me in ways I didn't understand. When it was my turn to speak, I felt a calm settle over me, but beneath that calm was a seething anger. I wasn't going to let them twist the truth. I wasn't going to let Rachel take away what was mine. But that's exactly what they tried to do. The lawyer pushed hard, suggesting that Rachel's financial contributions during our marriage gave her a claim to the property. I looked over at Rachel, sitting there with that smug look on her face, and I couldn't believe how she was spinning everything. But I wasn't going to let it break me. Inside, I was furious. But outwardly, I kept it together. I knew the truth. I had the documents to prove it, and I was going to fight. Walking out of that courtroom, I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. This was just the beginning. I had to prepare for battle. But even then, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to lose this house to someone who hadn't earned it. The weeks that followed that first court appearance were a blur. Every day felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting to see if I'd be pushed over. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I knew what I had to do. I had to gather the proof. I needed documents, contracts, anything that could show the truth. Rachel's lawyer had done their homework. It was time for me to do mine. I started digging through old files, pulling up every scrap of paperwork I could find. The house's original purchase agreement, tax returns from the year I bought the place, receipts for every single improvement I made, from the new roof to the kitchen remodel, all of it. I combed through old bank statements, trying to pinpoint the exact moment my business started to turn a profit, showing how I funded this place without any help from Rachel. It felt like digging up old memories. Unpleasant, but necessary. It wasn't just the financial stuff I needed to track down. I had to get witnesses, people who could vouch for me. So I called in my old realtor, who'd helped me find the house in the first place. He'd been around long enough to know the deal with Rachel and me. "Tom," he said over the phone, his voice gruff but supportive, "I remember you like it was yesterday. You were the one making all the decisions. She didn't want any part of the house. Hell, she didn't even help with the paperwork. She was barely involved except for picking out some paint swatches." That was the kind of statement I needed. Simple, clear, and honest. Next, I called my old banker. I knew he could help. He'd seen the loan I'd taken out for the house, the way I handled everything on my own. "You put down a hefty chunk of change for that place," he told me when I explained what was going on. "And you paid off the loan early, too. I don't know what your ex is thinking, but she doesn't have a leg to stand on with this." With these pieces falling into place, I started feeling a little more confident. I wasn't the kind of guy who liked confrontation, but I had to admit, I was getting angry now. The more I thought about it, the more absurd it became. How could Rachel, after all this time, just come back and claim ownership of something she never even wanted? But even with all the evidence, doubt still gnawed at me. I'd heard stories, seen it on TV. Sometimes courts don't care about the truth. Sometimes people win by playing the system, by getting the right lawyer, or by making the other side crack under pressure. What if she wins, I asked myself, pacing around the living room one evening. I had everything lined up, but that thought kept creeping in. What if all this hard work, all this preparation, wasn't enough? I'd gotten a good lawyer, someone who'd been through these kinds of cases before. His name was Mark, a quiet guy but sharp. He reassured me. "You've got the facts on your side, Tom, but you need to be ready for the long haul. This isn't going to be easy." I took that to heart. I started to prepare myself for every possibility. I spent evenings going over my testimony, practicing what I'd say. I didn't want to look like I was defensive or angry or too emotional. I needed to stay calm. I needed to be clear, concise, and, above all, convincing. The final hearing was coming up. It felt like the moment of truth. I knew Rachel was going to pull out every card she had left. The lawyer had already hinted at how they were going to twist things. They'd claim I hadn't worked hard enough for the house. They'd say it was our house, that I'd just hidden things from her. They'd attack my character, my work ethic, everything. But I didn't care. I had the truth on my side. The house was mine, and I wasn't about to let some fabricated version of our past steal it from me. The night before the hearing, I sat in the quiet of my office, my real office, the one I'd built from the ground up. I looked around at the paperwork, the photographs of the house, the stacks of receipts and contracts. It was everything I needed. This was it. This was the moment. And I wasn't going to lose. When the day of the hearing arrived, I put on my best suit, a navy blue one that I'd worn to meetings for years. I wanted to look professional. I wanted to look like someone who deserved to keep what he'd worked for. Mark met me outside the courthouse, and we went over our strategy one last time. He was confident. I tried to be, but the nerves were still there, simmering beneath the surface. We stepped into that courtroom, and it felt like I was walking into a lion's den. Rachel was already there, sitting with her lawyer, looking just as smug as ever. She barely looked at me, but I could see it in her eyes. The same arrogance, the same entitlement that had driven me crazy all those years ago. I took a seat next to Mark, and we waited for the judge to enter. The room was silent except for the scribbling of pens and the occasional shuffle of papers. The tension in the air was thick, almost unbearable. When the judge finally walked in, everyone stood up. The proceedings began. Rachel's lawyer went first. He was smooth, professional, and a little too eager. He laid out his case, twisting everything they could, how Rachel had helped me build the house, how I couldn't have made it on my own without her contributions. He spoke with such confidence, it almost made me doubt myself for a moment. But I kept my face neutral. Then it was my turn. Mark gave me a nod and I stood up, straightening my shoulders. "I built this house," I said, my voice steady. "I worked every day to make it happen. Rachel didn't help. She didn't want to help. The house is mine. I have all the documents to prove it." I showed the judge the contracts, the bank statements, The photos of the house when it was just a shell. I talked about the sweat, the long hours, the way I'd funded it all on my own. The realtor and the banker testified on my behalf, confirming everything I said. By the time I was done, I could see Rachel's face had changed. The smugness was gone. She didn't speak up again. Her lawyer seemed flustered, trying to counter every point, but it was too late. The judge took all of this into consideration, and then he turned to us. "I've reviewed all the evidence," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and it's clear to me that the house in question is Mr. Tom's property. There's no evidence to suggest that Mrs. Rachel has any claim to it." Rachel's face went pale. She didn't say a word. The judge made his ruling clear. Rachel was to leave the court empty-handed. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But it wasn't just relief. It was something deeper, something more satisfying. The house was mine. And Rachel? She walked away with nothing. Not a penny. Not a shred of the life she tried to claim. As I drove back to the house that had been mine all along, I couldn't help but reflect on how long I'd let myself be dragged into someone else's version of reality. How long I'd been quiet, how long I'd let the injustice of it all go unchallenged. But not anymore. I had fought for what was mine, and I'd won. In the end, the truth had prevailed, and that was enough. Patience, preparation, and the willingness to stand your ground. That's what it takes to fight for what's rightfully yours. The days following the court's decision felt like a slow exhale, a release of all the tension I'd been holding for months. The sense of finality in the ruling was almost surreal. I had won. I'd kept my house, and Rachel had walked away with nothing. No apology, no acknowledgement of her actions. She didn't even try to talk to me after the hearing. And honestly, I didn't care. As I sat in the quiet of the living room that evening, the house seemed somehow more mine than it ever had before. The walls, the furniture, the small touches I'd added over the years. Everything about this place had been built with my own hands and hard work. It wasn't just a house. It was a testament to the life I'd fought for. And now, finally, it was entirely mine again. I spent that night alone, reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. It was hard to believe it had even gotten this far. When Rachel first filed the lawsuit, I'd never imagined it would go all the way to court. I'd hoped, naively perhaps, that she'd just let it go. But the truth was, she never could let go of what wasn't hers. Her sense of entitlement was her downfall, and it had driven her to underestimate me. There were still moments when I felt the sting of betrayal, of how she'd tried to take something I'd worked so hard for. But as I sat there, I realized something. I was better off without the bitterness. I'd won the battle, but it wasn't just the house I was keeping. It was my peace of mind, my integrity, and my sense of self that mattered more than anything else. The phone call came 2 days after the court's decision. I recognized the number, and for a second, I debated whether or not I should pick up. But curiosity won out. "Hello," I answered, my voice even, but with a hint of reluctance. "Tom," came Rachel's voice, sounding tired and small. It was strange to hear her like this, defeated. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything." I paused, trying to read between the lines. Was this an apology, or just another attempt to make me feel sorry for her? "I don't know what you expect from me, Rachel," I said after a long pause. "You tried to take my home from me. After everything we went through, I thought you'd be above something like that. I wasn't thinking clearly. I let the past cloud my judgment. I thought I deserved more, and I let that drive me." I could hear the weight in her words, but it didn't move me the way I thought it would. "I get it, but what you did was wrong, and I'm not going to pretend like it didn't hurt," I replied, my voice firm but calm. "But this is over. The court has made its decision. Let's leave it at that." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear her processing what I'd said. "I know," she finally muttered. "I know. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and I don't want to drag this out anymore." I let out a short breath, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over me. "Good. Take care, Rachel." And with that, I ended the call. It wasn't a victory exactly. There were no grand speeches, no tears of reconciliation. Just two people, finally acknowledging the end of something that had long since run its course. The next few weeks passed by quickly. The initial relief of winning the case settled into a quiet sense of normalcy. I kept the house as it was. There were no drastic changes, no sudden decisions to renovate everything. It felt right the way it was. One afternoon, I decided to finally take a walk around the neighborhood, something I hadn't done in years. The house had always felt like a fortress, a place I kept to myself, but now that it was completely mine again, I wanted to reconnect with the world outside. As I walked down the street, I saw familiar faces, neighbors who'd waved to me over the years, but never really got to know me. It was a good day, the kind of day that reminded me that life doesn't always need to be a battle. Looking back now, I can say with certainty that this was more than just a legal victory. Sure, I'd won the house, but what I really won was a sense of peace, of closure. It's funny how life works like that sometimes. You fight so hard for something, and then, when you finally get it, you realize it's not the thing itself that mattered. It was the journey, the fight, the way you chose to handle the obstacles, the lies, and the betrayals. I learned something important through this whole process. Patience and preparation matter. You can't control what others do, but you can control how you respond. I stayed calm, even when I wanted to lash out. I focused on the facts, not the drama, and in the end, that was what got me through. It's easy to get caught up in the idea of revenge, of getting back at someone. But I realized that true victory doesn't come from tearing others down. It comes from standing your ground, no matter how hard the fight. As I stood on the front porch of my house that evening, the sun setting behind me, I couldn't help but feel a quiet pride. Not just for winning, but for knowing that I was stronger than I thought. And that, in the end, was all I really needed. I had fought for what was mine, and I had won.